The frost came before the corn was gathered, and that was the first of the omens the old women would later count on their fingers. Maza Wing, Iron Woman, though the name had been given to her mother and worn thin by 2 generations, knelt in the last light at the edge of the drying racks and pressed her palm flat against the earth. It was cold, the way a dead man's hand is cold, that deep and final chill that has nothing to do with the season and everything to do with what is leaving. She had felt it before. She had felt it the winter the sickness took her husband and both his brothers, the winter the soldiers burned the lodges along the river and the people scattered like ash on wind. She knew the feel of a season that had already decided against her. Behind her, in the low sod and hide shelter that was not a proper lodge and never would be, her 2 children slept the shallow sleep of the hungry. Changte, the boy, was 9 winters old and carried himself like a man who'd been told too early that he was the last one. Wiaka, the girl, was 6 and still small enough to believe that her mother could fix the sky. Maza Wing could not fix the sky. She could not fix anything. That was the truth she turned over in the dark like a stone in the mouth, sucking it for whatever moisture it might give. The agency had promised rations. The agency had promised many things. The beef that came was thin and green at the bone, and the flour was full of weevils, and there was never enough, and the man who wrote their names in his ledger looked at her the way a trader looks at a hide he intends to buy cheap. Twice now, the wagons had not come at all. The people camped near the fort were eating their horses. Soon they would have no horses, and then they would have nothing to eat and no way to leave. And that, she understood, was precisely the arithmetic the fort intended. She was 31 winters old. She felt 100. That evening, the headman, Tatanka Sapa, Black Bull, who had signed the paper because his people were starving and who had not slept well a single night since, called the remaining families together beneath the one big cottonwood that the soldiers had not cut. There were fewer of them every moon. Some had slipped north to join the bands still riding free in the buffalo country, though everyone knew the buffalo were going, nearly gone, shot from train windows and left to rot in hills of bone. Some had gone south to the agencies where the rations were said to be better and were not. Some had simply died and been wept over and wrapped and left on scaffolds the soldiers later pulled down. "They are moving us again," Black Bull said. He did not raise his voice. He had learned that a quiet voice carried further among frightened people than a loud one. "In the spring, to the dry countries south and west." "The agent says the land here is needed." "Needed for what?" someone asked, though everyone knew. "For cattle. For men with fences." Maza Wing said nothing. She was thinking of the dry country. She had heard of it from a woman whose relatives had been sent there, a place where the wind ate the topsoil and the water tasted of rust, and children coughed themselves grey through the winter. She was thinking that her children would not survive it. She knew this the way she knew the cold in the earth, not as fear, as fact. When the council broke apart, she walked back alone through the frozen grass, and the stars came out hard and bright and indifferent. And she stopped in the middle of the empty ground between the shelters and let herself, for the length of perhaps 10 breaths, be exactly as afraid as she was. She did not weep. Weeping was water, and water was for the living, and she was not sure yet which side of that line she stood on. She only stood and shook, and let the fear move through her the way a storm moves through a stand of trees, bending everything, breaking some things, passing. Then she straightened her back, because Wiyaka might wake, and a child should not open her eyes and find her mother broken. It was the trader who gave her the idea, though he did not mean to. His name was Harmon, and he kept a low store of rough boards near the fort, and he sold sugar and coffee and calico and bad whiskey to men who should not have had it, and he bought whatever the desperate had left to sell. Mesa Wing had brought him her mother's awl case, quill-worked in the old patterns, red and white, and the yellow that came from a plant only the old women remembered how to boil. It was the last beautiful thing she owned. He turned it over in his fat, clean hands and offered her a price that was an insult dressed as a kindness, and she took it because her children had not eaten meat in 11 days. "You'd do better," Harmon said, counting coins slowly to watch her hunger for them. "To go up to Hollow Elk's place. Man's got a claim up in the breaks, near 40 miles north. Runs a few cattle, traps, keeps to himself. Married a Cheyenne woman once, they say, so he don't mind your people. She died. He's been up there alone 3-4 years now." He shrugged. "Man like that could use a woman to keep his house. Wouldn't be the fort, wouldn't be the dry country." She took her coins and her insult, and she walked out into the cold, and she told herself she would not think about it. She thought about it all night. In the grave the next morning, she went down to the ration line because there was nothing else to be done, and she stood in it with Wiyaka on her hip and Chongtae pressed against her side, and she watched the line shuffle forward through mud churned to the color of old blood by 100 pairs of worn moccasins and cracked boots. The agent's clerk sat behind his plank table with his ledger and his little brass scale and his look of a man performing a great and tiresome charity. And when at last it was her turn, he ran his pencil down the column of names and made her wait while he found hers, though he had found it 100 times before and knew exactly where it was. This, too, was part of the ration. The waiting was part of it. The making you small was part of it, and cost the government nothing, and so was given out freely when the beef was not. He weighed her flour, and it was short, and they both knew it was short, and she said nothing, because the one woman she had seen argue had been struck from the book for a week, and her children had gone hungrier for the arguing. She took the sack. She took the strip of grey beef with the green shadow already in it near the bone. She said the word of thanks the clerk expected, the word that was itself a kind of tax, and she turned and carried her children and her insult back across the mud. And she did not let her face change until she was past the last of the lodges and alone. That night she made a thin soup of the beef and the last of the wild turnips she had dug in the fall, and she gave the most of it to the children, and she told them she had eaten already at the fire of a friend, which was a lie, and Chongtae looked at her over his bowl with his father's steady eyes, and did not believe her, and did not say so, because he had learned that some lies are gifts, and the kind thing is to take them. She watched them eat. There is a particular hunger a mother knows that has nothing to do with her own belly, the hunger to see them fed, sharper and more painful than any hunger of her own, and she felt it fill her up where the soup did not, and she thought, I will do the thing. Whatever the thing costs, I will do it. When they slept, she let herself remember her husband, which she did not often allow, because memory of him was a warm room she could not afford to sit in for long. His name had been Shungmani White Wolf, though she had called him by a smaller name that was theirs alone, and that she had not spoken aloud since the burying. He had been a quiet man, quick to laugh only with her, patient with the children in the way of a man who himself remembered being small. He had not died in any way that made a story. There had been no charge, no last stand, none of the things the old songs were made of. The coughing sickness had come to the camp on a trader's blanket, and it had taken the old and the young first. And then it had reached in past all of that, and taken him, a strong man of 34 winters, in the space of 9 days. And at the end, he had not been able to speak, only to look at her. And she had held his hand and told him she would keep the children alive. She had promised it into his failing ear. And she meant to keep that promise, if it cost her every last thing she was. That same winter, the soldiers had come. She did not let herself remember all of it. The horses screaming, the lodge poles burning like the ribs of some great dead animal, the running through snow in the blue dark with a child under each arm, and no time even to weep for the man 3 weeks in the ground. She remembered only enough to make her certain. She had run once with her children through fire. She would not do it a second time and lose. Better to walk of her own will to a stranger's door and bargain than to be driven again into the dry country to watch them cough themselves grey. Better to spend herself, all of herself, than to spend them. So it was decided, the way the hardest things are decided, not in a flash of courage, but in the long, grinding certainty of the sleepless dark, turned over and over until there is nothing left of it but the shape of what must be done. In the morning, she traded the last of her husband's good winter mittens for a little dried meat for the road, and she did not let herself feel the mittens leave her hands, and she began to make ready. A man who keeps to himself in that country keeps to himself for a reason, and the reasons are never kind ones. This is the first thing everyone said about Hollow Elk. The whites called him that. His own name, the one his mother had given him, he had not spoken aloud to another living person in a long time. They said he had killed men. This was true. They said he had ridden with the soldiers as a scout, and then against them, or against the soldiers, and then with them. The story changed depending on who told it and how afraid they were. They said his wife had died of the coughing sickness, and that he had buried her himself with his own hands in the frozen ground, and had not come down to the fort for a whole winter afterward. And that when he did come down, he was so changed that men who had known him crossed to the other side of the road. They said he did not drink, which, in that country, was itself a kind of strangeness. They said he was more than half a ghost already, and that the living made him tired. Most of this was closer to true than the men who said it knew. Maza Wing made the journey in the last hard week before the true winter, when the mud had frozen into ruts that could break a horse's leg, and the sky sat low and grey and full of the coming snow. She had one horse, an old dun with a swayed back and a patient eye, and she put Wiaka up before her, and Changte walked, and later Changte rode and she walked, and it took them 2 days and a night, and the night was very bad. She built a fire in the lee of a cut bank and held both children against her body inside the one buffalo robe she had not sold, and she stayed awake to keep the fire, and she watched the dark and listened to the wolves saying to each other the old, true things wolves say, and she did not sleep at all. She was not a woman who had ever imagined she would go to a strange man and offer to keep his house in exchange for her children's lives. She had married once for love, quiet, ordinary, deep-rooted love, the kind that grows without anyone watering it, and she had believed, in the foolish way of the young, that this was how her life would simply continue. She thought about her husband on that cold night. She thought that he would understand. She was almost sure he would understand. She was less sure she would ever forgive herself. But forgiveness, like weeping, was for people who had the luxury of a future, and she was trying to buy one for her children at the only price she had left, which was herself. Hollow Elk's place came into view on the second afternoon, a low cabin of squared logs chinked with mud, a pole corral, a lean-to shelter, a smokehouse, all of it set back against a wall of broken red rock where the cold could not get a straight run at it. Cattle stood humpbacked in the bottom, breathing steam. A dog began to bark and then stopped, silenced by something. The man came out of the cabin with a rifle in the crook of his arm. He did not point it at her, he simply held it, the way another man might hold a walking stick, and he watched them come up the frozen track with a face that gave away nothing at all. He was tall and gone lean the way meat goes lean in a hard winter, all sinew and economy. There was grey in his hair, though he was not old. His eyes were the flat dark of a well you cannot see the bottom of. She stopped the horse a respectful distance off, and she got down, stiff with cold, and she lifted Wiaka down, and she stood with a hand on each child, and she said what she had practiced saying, in the trade language they would both know. I am not begging. It was important to her that this be the first thing. I have work in my hands. I can tan, I can sew, I can cook, I can garden, I can doctor with the plants. I can keep this place better than one man alone can keep it. She paused. Her breath smoked. I have 2 children. We were to be sent to the dry country in the spring. My children will not live through it. I am asking for a winter, only a winter. In the spring, if you want us gone, we will go. The man looked at her a long time. Then he looked at the boy, who had lifted his chin and was doing his best to look like someone worth the trouble of feeding, and then at the girl, who had pressed her face into her mother's leg. Something moved far down in the well of his eyes, and then was still again. Life here isn't kind, he said at last. His voice was rough with disuse. Life never was, she answered, and he stood aside from the door. The inside of the cabin was one long room, dark and low and smelling of wood smoke and cured hides and the particular mustiness of a place where one person has been alone too long. A single small window let in grey light through a pane of scraped rawhide. There was a stone hearth at one end, well built, a man's careful work, and a plank table, and a bunk against the far wall, and pegs on which hung traps and coiled rope, and a second rifle, and the small, ordinary tools by which a man kept himself alive in that country. There was no softness anywhere in it, nothing that had been kept for its beauty. It was the house of a man who had decided that beauty was a thing that could be taken from you, and had chosen, therefore, to own none of it. He showed her nothing and told her less. He pointed once with his chin at the near corner by the hearth, and she understood that this was to be theirs. And she spread their 2 robes there, and set Wiaka down, and told Changte to gather what wood he could find against the wall, giving the boy at once a task. Because a boy with a task is a boy who is not afraid, or is at least too busy to show it. The man watched the boy go to the woodpile, and something in his face eased by a degree so small she might have imagined it. That first night, none of them truly slept but the girl. Maza Wing lay with her children breathing against her, and listened to the strange man breathe across the room, and kept her hand near the little knife she carried, not because she had decided to distrust him, but because trust was a thing she no longer gave to anyone on the strength of a single day, and would have been a fool to. She listened to the wind test the chinking. She listened to the cattle shift and low in the dark outside. She listened, near dawn, to the man rise without a sound and build up the fire and go out into the cold, and she listened to the dog greet him. And she understood that whatever this was, it had a shape and a rhythm, a man's long habit of solitary survival, and that she and her children had stepped into the middle of it, like stones dropped into a still pool, and that the water had not yet decided how to close over them. For 3 days she nearly left. She would think it through in the gaps of the work, the corral to muck, the hides to scrape, the endless snow to melt for water. And she would tell herself that this was madness, that she had brought her children to the house of a man the whole country called the killer, that she had traded a known misery for an unknown one, and each time she came to the edge of gathering them up and going, she would look at the woodpile Changte had stacked with such fierce care, or at the color that had come back into Wiaka's cheeks after 2 nights warm and 2 meals full, and she would think, not yet, 1 more day. And the days had a way of becoming the next day and the next, until leaving stopped being a thing she thought about and became instead a thing she had decided, without ever quite deciding it, not to do. They did not become a family that winter. That is a thing the people who tell such stories afterward like to say, that hardship melted the ice between them, that need became love. It was not like that. It was slower than that and less certain, and there were long stretches when Mesa Wing lay awake on her side of the cabin, the children breathing against her, and listened to the silent man breathe against the far wall, and wondered whether she had traded one kind of dying for another. The rules were understood without being spoken. She had the near corner by the hearth for herself and the children. He kept the far corner. He did not touch her, and did not look at her in the way she had braced herself to be looked at. And after a while she understood that whatever Harmon the trader had imagined he was arranging, it was not what was happening here. The man had not taken a wife. He had taken in 3 people who would have died, because, she came to see this only slowly, he was a man who had once failed to keep someone alive, and could not bear to fail again, and had told himself a hard lie about not caring in order to keep breathing. The work was endless, and it saved her. There is a mercy in work that grief cannot reach. She threw herself into it. She scrubbed the cabin down to the wood, and hung herbs to dry from the rafters until the whole place smelled of sage and sweetgrass instead of old smoke and loneliness. She took over the cooking, and the man ate what she made without a word. But he ate all of it. And once she caught him at the door with his eyes closed and his face turned to the smell of the pot. And he looked, for that one unguarded moment, like a man remembering something he had decided to forget. The children thawed faster, the way children do. Wiaka was the first. She was 6, and she could not sustain fear for long against the pull of curiosity. And there was the dog, a big, rough, grey brute that had frightened her at first and then, within a week, was letting her sleep against its flank. There were the cattle to watch, and the ice to break on the water trough, and the astonishing red rock to climb. By the turn of the deep moon, she had begun to follow the man at a distance, silent as a burr, and he pretended not to notice her. And one bitter morning, Maza Wing looked out and saw him crouched at the corral with the girl beside him, his big scarred hands guiding her small ones as she learned to check a cow's hoof for the rot. And neither of them was talking, and both of them were, for that moment, entirely at peace. Chanty took longer. The boy had appointed himself the man of his family, too young, and he watched Hollow Elk the way a young dog watches an old one, weary, jealous, aching to be taught, furious at the aching. He worked twice as hard as his small body could stand and would not admit tiredness. He resented, she thought, that they needed a stranger at all. It felt to him like a verdict on his own failure to keep them safe, though no 9-year-old should ever have carried such a weight in the first place. It was the man who broke it, in his own slow way. One morning he handed the boy a knife, a real one, a good one, and said only, "A man should have his own. Keep it sharp. A dull knife is a lazy man's confession." And he showed him how to hold the stone, how to draw the edge, and Chongtae worked at it for hours, and when he had an edge that would part a hair, he brought it to the man to see, trying not to show how much it mattered, and the man tested it against his thumb and nodded once, and that single nod was worth more to the boy than a season of praise. Winter closed its fist. The snow came and came. Some nights the wind found the gaps in the chinking, and the fire bent flat, and the cold pressed against the walls like a living thing that wanted in. They learned each other's silences. She learned that he rose before light and walked the trap lines, however cruel the weather, and came back with frost in his eyebrows and rabbits and once a fox, and once, memorably, nothing at all and a face like weathered stone. He learned that she sang under her breath while she worked, old songs, songs from the buffalo days, and that she stopped the instant she noticed him listening. And so he learned to listen without letting her notice. One night, deep in the worst of it, Wiaka woke screaming from a dream of the soldiers, of fire, of the running in the dark that was the oldest thing in her small memory. Maza Wing held her, but the child could not be reached, thrashing and wailing in the grip of a terror too large for her. And the silent man rose in the dark and crossed the cabin and knelt by them, and he began, very low, to sing. It was a Cheyenne song, his dead wife's people's song, a song for quieting children, worn smooth by 100 years of mothers. His voice was rough and uncertain, a man's voice reaching for something it had not touched in years. And the child quieted, and when she slept again, he stayed there a moment, on his knees in the cold, and Maza Wing saw that his face was wet, and she looked away to give him the dignity of it. And neither of them ever spoke of that night. But something had shifted. The next morning he brought in extra wood without being asked, and built the fire up higher than his own frugal habit allowed. And she understood it for what it was, the only apology or thanks or confession the man knew how to make, and she accepted it the same way, by saying nothing and cooking him the best of the meat. They were not a family, but they had begun to be something. A fire has to be small and fragile before it can be large. The deep of the winter taught them each other. There is no faster teacher than a hard season shared in a small space. It strips people down past their manners to the plain grain of what they are. She learned that he was fair. This surprised her more than it should have. He divided the meat evenly and gave the children the better portions without comment. And when the coffee ran low, he drank his weak and gave theirs strong, and he never once raised his voice. Not to her, not to the children, not even to the dog. And she came to understand that his silence was not coldness, but a kind of held breath, the carefulness of a man who had learned that the things he loved could be taken, and had decided, wrongly, that the way to keep from losing them was to refuse to say aloud that he had them. There was a blizzard in the heart of the winter that she would remember all her life. It came down out of the north in an afternoon, the sky going the colour of a bruise and then of nothing at all, the world erasing itself in white, and the wind rose to a scream that did not stop for 2 days and 2 nights. On the second night, the fire was not enough. The cold came through the walls like water through cloth, and they moved the robes into the middle of the room and heaped everything they had over the children. And Mazawing and the man sat back to back through the black hours, with the little ones between them, sharing the heat of their own 2 bodies, because there was no other heat to be had. And neither of them spoke of the strangeness of it. 2 people who a season before had been utter strangers, now keeping each other's blood from freezing with the plain warmth of their spines pressed together. In the morning, the storm had eaten one of the yearling steers, found frozen standing up against the corral rail, and the man looked at it a long while and then said only, "We eat well for a time then," and butchered it in the cold with his breath smoking, and nothing was wasted. And that was the winter's grim arithmetic, and they were all of them grateful for it. It was after the blizzard that the boy nearly died, and it was that, more than anything, that made them what they became. Chante had gone out to break the ice on the water trough, a chore he had claimed as his own, proud of it, and the cold was the deep, still cold that comes after a great storm, the kind that does not feel like much until it has already done its work. He stayed out too long. He was a boy, and he did not know yet that the body can be dying while the mind still feels only sleepy and warm. And when he did not come in, the man was already rising, already reaching for his coat, moving faster than Mazawing had ever seen him move. He found the boy sitting down in the snow by the trough, smiling, saying he only wanted to rest a moment. And the man carried him in and stripped the frozen clothes from him and put the boy's white feet against his own bare belly under his shirt, against the only quick heat in that cold house, and held him there, and rubbed his hands and his feet, and would not let Mazawing see her fear, because his own certainty was the boy's best chance. All night he held him, and near dawn the boy began to shiver, hard, painfully, which the man said was good, which meant the body had decided to live and was fighting for it. And Chante wept from the pain of the blood coming back into his feet. And the man held him through that too and said, "Lo, hurts because you're still here. Let it hurt. It means you get to stay." And the boy, who had for months held the man at arm's length out of a jealous grief, wept into that hard chest like the child he still was, and was, after that night, no longer able to pretend the man was a stranger. The man did not sleep that night, nor the next day. He walked out at last only when the boy was warm and eating, and Maza Wing followed him with her eyes, and saw him stand alone at the corner of the cabin with his hand over his face, and she understood that he had been more afraid than any of them, that the fear of losing this boy had opened in him the old wound of the wife he had not saved, and that he had poured everything he had into not failing a second time. She did not go to him. She gave him the dignity of his solitude, as he had given her hers. But that night she cooked the last of the good back fat from the storm-killed steer and set it before him without a word. And he looked at the plate and then at her, and something passed between them that was not yet love, but was the deep bedrock on which love, when it came, would find it could stand. After that, the evenings changed. He began, haltingly at first, to tell the children things. Not stories at the start, only knowledge. The plain, hard-won knowledge of the country. How to read a sky. How to know good ice from rotten. Which plants under the snow would feed a person and which would kill one. How a horse tells you with its ears everything it is about to do. And then one night the knowledge became a story. One of the old ones his wife's people told, about how the world was made and remade. And Wiyaka fell asleep against his arm in the middle of it, and he did not move for a long time for fear of waking her. And Maza Wing, mending by the fire, watched the flame light move on his still face, and thought that she had been wrong about him from the first, that he was not a man with nothing soft in him, but a man with too much, a man who had buried it deep precisely because it was too much, and who was, plank by plank, letting it back up into the light. She told her own stories too, in her turn, the stories of her own people, the ones her grandmother had told her, and the two ways of telling sat together by the one fire and did not quarrel. And the children took both into themselves, the way children do, without asking which was which. And she thought, this is a thing being saved here. Not only us. The stories. The stories are being carried across the cold on the backs of these two small ones. And that is a kind of winning the fort, with all its ledgers knows nothing about. Trouble in that country did not announce itself. It rode up out of the bottoms on good horses, wearing good coats, smiling. The first sign was in the melting time, when the snow went rotten and grey, and the creeks ran high and brown. 3 riders came up the track, a rancher named Coulter, who ran cattle on the flats to the south, and 2 men who worked for him, and wore their pistols where they could be seen. Maza Wing knew the look of them before they were close. She had seen it at the fort, at the agency, in the eyes of the man who wrote their names in his ledger. It was the look of men who had decided that the land was theirs, and that the only question remaining was how much trouble the taking would be. Hollowelk went out to meet them, with the rifle in the crook of his arm. He did not ask them to get down. That too was a language. Coulter was a heavy, pleasant-faced man who had learned that pleasantness was cheaper than violence, and often did the same work. He talked about the weather. He talked about the winter, hard on the stock, wasn't it? He talked, at length and with great friendliness, about how the country was filling up, how a man had to think about the future, how the land Hollowelk was on had never been properly filed, had it? Not with all the paper in order, and how it happened that Coulter had a claim that touched it, and how it would be a simple thing, a neighborly thing, to come to an arrangement. And then, still smiling, he looked past Hollowelk to the cabin door, where Maza Wing stood with the children behind her, and his pleasant face did something small and ugly. "Didn't know you'd taken up with agency Indians," he said. "Runaways, I'd guess. There's men at the fort would pay to know where they got to, or the army would just come collect 'em, save you the feeding." The silence after that was very long. "They're mine," Hollowelk said finally. 3 words, flat as the rock behind the cabin. Coulter's smile widened, because he had found the thing he had come to find, the soft place, the lever. "Well now," he said, "that's worth talking about then. A man's got to protect what's his. Be a shame if word got to the fort. Be a shame if it didn't. Depends on how neighbourly a fellow wants to be about a strip of grass he can't hardly use anyhow." He touched his hat to Maza Wing. The insult of the courtesy was deliberate, and he turned his horse, and he and his men rode back down into the bottoms, unhurried, certain, the way men ride when they believe time is on their side. That night the cabin was very quiet. The children slept. Maza Wing sat across the fire from the man and studied his shadowed face, and said the thing that had been sitting in her chest since morning like a stone. "You should let us go," she said. "In the morning, before he sends word, we will go north. We will take our chances with the free bands." Her voice did not shake, though the cost of the words was very high. "You did what you said. You gave us a winter. There is no debt. I will not have you lose your land or your life over 3 people who are not—" She stopped. "Who are not yours." For a long time he did not answer. The fire ticked and settled. "My wife," he said at last, and it was the first time he had spoken of her, and Maza Wing went very still, understanding that she was being given something. "My wife died because I moved too slow. There was medicine at the fort. I told myself the storm was too bad to ride. I told myself she'd be stronger by morning. I was afraid of the cold." He looked into the fire. "I have thought about that every day for 4 years, that I was afraid of the cold, and it cost her everything." He raised his flat, dark eyes to hers, and for once the well had a bottom, and there was something living down there in the dark of it. "I am done being afraid of the cold." He did not say, "I will not let you go." He did not say, "You are mine," though Coulter had said it for him, and he had not corrected it. He only said that, and it was enough. And she understood that they had crossed some river in the dark without either of them naming the water. But understanding a man's heart does not stop a rich man's guns, and she knew, lying awake that night, that Coulter would come back. Men like Coulter always came back. The only questions were when, and with how many, and whether there would be anything left standing when they had finished. The waiting after Coulter's visit was its own kind of hardship, worse in some ways than a blow would have been, because a blow at least ends and can be met, while waiting only sits in the chest and grows. The children felt it, the way children always feel the weather of the adults around them, without being able to name it. Wiaka grew clinging again, and woke twice more from the old dreams of fire. Changte went the other way, into a hard, bright watchfulness, checking the horses at odd hours, standing at the window at dusk, a boy trying to be a wall between his family and the danger he did not fully understand. It was the man who steadied them, and the way he did it told Mesa Wing more about what he had become to them than any word could have. He did not pretend there was no danger. He had never in his life pretended anything, and he did not insult the boy by starting now. Instead, he taught. He showed Changti where a person could go if the cabin ever had to be left in a hurry, up into the broken red rock, where a single person with a rifle could hold off many, and where there was a cleft, a hidden dry place, provisioned quietly with a robe and dried meat and a skin of water that he had prepared, she realized, in the days since Coulter came. He showed Wiaka gently how to be small and quiet and still. Made a game of it, so the game would be there in her hands if the terror ever came, so that fear would find her already holding a tool against it. He was, Mesa Wing understood, doing for her children what no one had been able to do for her in the winter of the burning. He was giving them a plan, a place, a thing to do with their hands, so that if the worst came, they would not be only prey running in the dark. One evening, watching him show the boy how to load and hold the second rifle, she found the memory of the burning rising in her unbidden, and for once she let it come, all of it, because she thought perhaps the time had come to stop carrying it alone. Later, when the children slept, she told him. She told him about the soldiers in the blue dark, about the lodge poles burning, about running with a child under each arm 3 weeks after she had buried her husband, about the old woman who had not been able to run, and what she had seen when she looked back once, and had never allowed herself to look back again in memory since. She told it plainly, without weeping, because she had no tears left for it, only the old, cold weight. And he listened without once looking away, which is the rarest and hardest kind of listening. And when she was done, he did not offer her comfort, because he was not a man who dealt in comfort, and would not cheapen her telling with easy words. He only said, after a long silence, "That will not happen here, not while I stand up." And she believed him, not because a man's promise is worth much against soldiers and rich men, but because she had seen him hold a dying boy against his own skin all night, and she knew now the exact size of what he had, and that he would spend all of it before he let the fire come to her children a second time. And so the waiting became, strangely, a kind of forging. It pressed them together, and it burned away the last of what had been careful and provisional between them. And by the time she sat down to think through how they would meet Coulter, she no longer thought of it as his fight that she was caught up in, nor as her trouble that he had taken on. She thought of it as theirs. It was the first thing that had ever been fully theirs, and it was a threat of ruin, and she was, God help her, almost glad of it, because a shared danger is also a shared belonging, and she had not belonged anywhere or to anyone since the night the lodges burned. They did not wait to be surprised. That was her doing, and it was the moment she stopped being a guest in the man's house and became something closer to its second heart. "He will come when he thinks we are not looking," she said. "Or he will send the soldiers and let them do it with the law in their hands, which is worse, because you cannot fight the law with a rifle." She had thought it all through in the long night, the way she thought through everything, turning it over and over. So we do not let him choose the ground. We choose it. Hollow Elk looked at her with something new in his face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. As though he had suspected, and was now certain, that the woman who kept his house had a mind like a good blade. What they did was this. He rode, not to Coulter, but past him, down to the fort, 3 hard days. And there he did the one thing Coulter had never imagined he would do, because it required a man to walk back into a world that had decided he was a ghost. He filed. He stood in the land office in his worn coat with the dust of the road on him, and he swore out his claim on the ground he had lived on, and worked, and buried his wife in. And he paid the fee with money he had saved, coin by coin, against a rainy day. And he had the papers made out proper, and witnessed and stamped. And he took a copy, and left a copy, so that the record existed in 2 places, and could not simply vanish the way inconvenient records vanished in that country. And while he was there, he found the one man at the fort who owed him a debt from the scouting days, a clerk with a conscience gone soft with age, and he made sure, quietly, the way real things are done, that a certain rancher's history of moving fences and burning out settlers was written down where an inspector from the east, should one ever come, might happen to read it. It was not a gunfight. That was the thing Maza Wing had understood that Coulter had not. The frontier was ending, though the men living on it could not always feel the ground shifting under them. The day was passing when a rich man could simply take what he wanted with 3 riders and a smile. And the day was coming, slowly, unevenly, imperfectly, when a piece of paper in a locked drawer could matter more than a pistol. It was a cruel age and a corrupt one, and the paper more often served the Coulters than their victims. But not always. And a person with nothing left to lose, she had learned, must become very good at finding the not always. Coulter came in the end, as she had known he would. He came with 4 men this time, in the grey before dawn, thinking to find them asleep. But the dog was awake, and the boy was awake. Changte had taken the middle watch, sharp-eyed and proud of the trust, and by the time the riders reached the corral, Hollow Elk was standing in the open door of his cabin with his rifle, and Maza Wing was at the shuttered window with the second gun, and Coulter's men could see, in the growing light, that this would not be the easy thing they had been promised. Coulter tried the smile one more time. "This is my land now," he began. "You've got nothing." Hollow Elk's voice carried flat and cold across the frozen yard. "It's filed, stamped, copy at the fort and a copy in my hand. You burn this cabin, you burn a filed claim, and there's a clerk down there who'll know exactly whose match it was. And there's a paper down there, too, about you, about the Hanson place, about the family that got burned out on the Little Muddy." He let that sit. "The country's changing, Coulter. You just haven't felt it yet."
"Ride onto this ground again, and I don't shoot you. I write it down. And these days, a man like you should be a lot more afraid of ink than lead." It was a strange kind of confrontation, and the strangeness of it was the whole point. Coulter had come prepared for fear, for flight, for a desperate stand he could put down and call self-defense. He was not prepared to be outmaneuvered by a ghost and a runaway woman who had thought 3 moves further ahead than he had. And he was, underneath the pleasant face, a coward. Most such men are. And cowards understand leverage better than anyone. And he had just felt the leverage move under him and reverse. He sat his horse a long moment in the cold dawn. Then he wheeled it around without another word, and he and his men rode down into the bottoms, and this time there was nothing certain in the way they rode. No shot had been fired. That was the victory. And it was Maza Wing's victory as much as the man's. And they both knew it. And when the riders were gone, she came out into the yard and stood beside him, and their shoulders were almost touching. And for a long time, neither of them said anything at all, because the not saving was so large and so good that words would only have made it smaller. The days after were quiet in a way that felt almost unreal, the way the air feels scrubbed and enormous after a storm has passed. They did not speak of Coulter again for a long while, though they both knew he was not truly finished, only checked. Men like that are never finished, only made to wait for a better season. And both of them carried that knowledge the way a person carries an old wound in a joint, a thing you learn to move around. But for now, there was room to breathe. And into that room, something new came, slowly, the way the first green comes into the burned ground, not all at once, but here and there, tentative, easily missed if you were not watching for it. He began to seek her company. It was a small thing, and he would have died before he called it that, but she saw it. The way he found reasons to work near where she was working, the way he began to save up small pieces of the day to tell her. A fox he had seen, the ice going out of the creek, a thing the boy had said that had made him want to laugh. He was courting her, she understood at last, though neither of them would ever have used so soft a word. And he was doing it in the only language he had, which was the language of work shared and small dangers faced together, and the plain, wordless offering of his own steadiness, day after day, like a man laying stones one at a time to build a wall against the weather. One afternoon in that thawing time, he took her up into the rock, to the grave. She had known it was there, a low mound of stones on a shelf of the red cliff, facing east toward the coming of the light, tended, the stones straight, a place kept. But she had never gone to it because it was his, and there are places a person does not go uninvited. This time he invited her with his chin, the way he said everything, and she went, and they stood together at the grave of the Cheyenne woman he had loved, and for a long while he said nothing at all.
Then he spoke of her. Not much. He was not a man who could say much, but he told Maza Wing her name, which was a gift beyond price, the giving of a dead beloved's name to a living one. And he said that she had been quick to laugh and slow to anger, and that she had made this hard country feel like a place a person could live rather than only survive, and that when she died, he had decided, in the madness of his grief, that he would never again let anyone matter that much, because mattering that much was a debt the world would always, in the end, come to collect. I was wrong, he said, looking not at the grave now, but out over the country, the great tawny reach of it going green at the edges. You cannot keep a thing safe by refusing to love it. You only keep yourself from having loved it. The losing comes anyway. The having is the only part you get a say in.
And Maza Wing, who had made in her own grief the very same bargain, and was only now beginning to unmake it, understood that he had not brought her here to speak of the dead, but to tell her, in the only way he could bear to, that he had chosen to have rather than to guard, and that the choosing was of her. Spring came the way it comes in that country, not gently, but all at once, in a green rush, as though the land had been holding its breath. The creeks ran clear, the rock face bloomed with tiny, hardy flowers in the cracks where nothing should grow. The cattle dropped their calves in the bottom, and the coyotes sang about it every night. Maza Wing had said in the fall, only a winter, in the spring, if you want us gone, we will go. Spring came, and no one spoke of going. Instead they planted. She broke ground below the cabin, where the soil was black and deep, and she put in corn and beans and squash in the old way, the three sisters together. And she taught wee Akka the songs that went with the planting, the ones that thanked the seed for agreeing to become food. And the girl sang them in her high, clear voice, and the man, mending the corral nearby, listened without letting on. They built. Hollow Elk and Changte cut and hauled logs and raised a second room onto the cabin, so that the children had a place of their own. And the raising of it was the boy's real coming of age, more than any single knife or nod. The day he set the ridgepole with his own hands, and the man said, in front of his mother, "He's a better hand than most grown men I've hired." And the boy had to turn away and look very hard at the horizon, so no one would see his face. Daily life settled over them like the good, ordinary weather it was. The astonishing thing about it, the thing Maza Wing marveled at in quiet moments, kneeling in her garden with the sun on her back, was how quickly the extraordinary becomes the ordinary, how fast the miracle of simply being alive and fed and unafraid becomes just the shape of the days. She had thought, in the terrible fall, that she would spend the rest of her life grateful merely to have survived. Instead, she found herself 6 months on, scolding Changte for tracking mud, arguing with the man about whether to sell the grey steer or keep him, worrying about whether the corn would make before the frost. The small worries of the living, the blessed small worries of people who have a future to worry about. And the man changed most of all. It was not a sudden thing, and it was not a complete thing. He would always be a man with a well of darkness in him, a man who walked his trap lines alone and needed the silence of the high rocks the way other men needed company. But the ghost went out of him, slowly, over that spring and summer. He began to speak more. He began, once or twice, to laugh. A rusty, astonished sound, as though he had discovered a tool he thought he'd lost. He told the children stories in the evenings, his and hers both. The Cheyenne tales his wife had taught him, and the older ones from before. And Maza Wing added the stories of her own people, and the two traditions sat together by the same fire and did not quarrel. And the children grew up with both, which was its own kind of survival, the survival of the stories, which are the truest thing a people owns. The transformation in her was quieter and went deeper. She had come to that place a woman who had decided, somewhere in the terrible winters behind her, that love was a door she had already walked through and closed, that whatever came next she would face as a mother and a worker and a survivor, but not, ever again, as a woman with a soft place in her. And she felt that decision loosening in her, plank by plank, over that green spring, and it frightened her more than Coulter's guns had, because a rifle can only take your life, and this could take something she was less sure she could afford to lose. That first full summer at the place was, when she looked back on it in later years, the season in which the family they were becoming finally set. The way a thing set out in the sun finally hardens into its lasting shape. The work of it was endless, and she loved the work now in a way she had not thought she could ever love work again, because it was work with a future in it, work that was building something rather than only staving off an ending. They went once, in the early summer, down to the settlement to trade, hides and the winter's furs, against the things they could not make: coffee, salt, powder and shot, needles, a bolt of stout cloth. It was a risk to go among people, for her and the children especially, and they were careful, and the man was watchful in a way that never quite left him. But it was also, she found, a thing she had missed without knowing she missed it. The noise of other lives, the smell of other cook fires, the sight of faces she did not know. And there was, at the edge of the settlement, another family working a hard claim, a widow named Hanson and her grown sons, the same Hanson place Hollow Elk had spoken of to Coulter. And the two households, each of which had felt the weight of the same rich man's ambition, took a quiet, careful liking to one another, and it was agreed, without quite being said, that they would look out for each other, send word if riders came, that two small households, standing together, were harder to burn out than one alone. It was not much, but she had learned that survival in that country was made of not muches, stacked patiently one on another until they were, together, a kind of wall. Jonte made his first real hunt that summer, and came back walking 3 inches taller behind a deer he had taken clean at a distance that made even the man raise his eyebrows, and the whole camp ate of it, and they made a small, quiet ceremony of it in the old way, the boy thanking the deer for its life, and the man standing back and letting Maza Wing lead the words, because they were her people's words. And she saw him watching the boy with something on his face that a stranger might not have read, but that she read easily now, because she had learned his face the way you learn a country you mean to live in. It was pride. It was a father's pride. He would not have said the word. He did not need to. There was a hailstorm in the high summer that flattened a corner of the corn and killed a calf, and they bore it, because that is what the land asks, that you bear what it sends and go on, that you take the seasons as they come and do not waste your strength cursing the sky. There were long gold evenings when the work was done and they sat outside and the children caught the first fireflies
and the dog lay in the dust with its old scarred head on its paws, and there were nights of ordinary weariness and ordinary contentment, the kind that no story is ever made of, because there is nothing in them but peace, and peace does not make a song.
But she had come to understand that peace was the rarest thing she had ever held, rarer than courage, rarer than love even. And she held it carefully, and she did not take a single ordinary evening of it for granted, because she, of all people, knew how thin the wall was, and how much labour it had cost to raise it, and how quickly, in that country and that age, the weather could turn. It happened, in the end, over something small. That is how the largest things always happen. It was late summer. The corn was tall, and the light in the evenings had gone gold and long. Wiaka had fallen from the corral fence and skinned her leg badly, and she had cried, and the man had carried her in and held her still, while Mesa Wing cleaned it and bound it with the yarrow poultice. And the child had reached up in her hurt and pain and called him, without thinking, the way a child says the truest things, by a word that meant Father. The cabin went very still. The man did not say anything. He did not correct her. He only sat there with a small girl against his chest, and his hand, that big, scarred hand that had killed men and buried a wife and drawn a knife edge fine enough to part a hair, came up very slowly and rested on the child's dark head. And Masa Wing, kneeling with the poultice still in her hands, looked up and found him looking at her over the child's head. And everything that neither of them had said in a year of silences was in that look. And it did not need saying, and so it was not said. Later, when the children slept, they sat outside in the warm dark with a whole enormous sky wheeling overhead, and for a while neither spoke. She didn't mean anything by it, Masa Wing said finally, offering him the way out. It was a habit, offering people the way out. Children say, I know what children say. A pause. The old cottonwood leaves whispered, and I know what I want them to be able to say. If you... He stopped. He was a man who had unlearned the words for this a long time ago, and was having to find them again in the dark, one at a time, like stones in a river crossing. I'm not asking you to forget him, your husband. I wouldn't. I couldn't ask that of anyone. I know what it costs to be asked that. He meant his wife. She understood. I'm only saying, there's room, here, for all of them, him and her both, in the stories we tell, and room for, the last word came hardest, us. If you want it, and if you don't, that's a whole thing too, and you'll still have this place as long as you want it, you and them, and I'll not say another word about it. It was, she thought, the longest string of words she had ever heard him put together, and every one of them had cost him, and that was how she knew. She did not answer him with a word. She reached across the small, dark distance between them and put her hand over his, over that big, scarred hand. And she felt it turn under hers and close around it, careful, as though her hand were something that could break, as though it were the most precious thing he had held in a very long time. They were not, even then, a perfect happiness. She wanted to be honest with herself about that, sitting in the dark. There would be hard winters still. There would be years the corn failed, and years the cattle died, and the long shadow of the fort and the agency and the changing, narrowing world would reach even up into the breaks and touch them. She was not fool enough to believe otherwise. The old free life was gone and would not come back, and no cabin and no love could bring back the buffalo or the vast, unfenced grass or the dead. Grief does not end. It only makes room, if you let it, for other things to grow beside it. The way the tough, small flowers grew in the cracks of the red rock, where nothing should have been able to live at all. But they had made a family out of strangers, out of need and silence, and shared work, and one Cheyenne lullaby sung in the dark. And a family, she had come to understand, was not the thing you were born into and lost. A family was the thing you decided, over and over, in the cold, to keep alive. It was a choice you made every morning when you built the fire. It was a fire you tended precisely because you knew how easily it could go out. The stars turned overhead, the same stars that had looked down so indifferently on her in the empty ground between the shelters a year before, when she had shaken with fear and decided she was still, after all, on the side of the living. They did not seem indifferent now. Or perhaps they were exactly as indifferent as they had always been, and the difference was only in her, in the woman sitting in the warm dark with her hand in a good man's hand, and her children sleeping safe, and the corn standing tall in the black earth she had broken with her own 2 hands. Either way, she thought, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, against all the cold arithmetic of that country and that age, a life, earned, imperfect, and quietly, stubbornly, going on. Somewhere down in the bottoms, a coyote called, and another answered it, and the old dog lifted its head and then lay back down, satisfied that all was well. And it was. For now, in the small circle of firelight they had made against the enormous dark, it was.